Welcome to this month's SUNY Best event. See some familiar faces and see some folks I haven't seen before, and I guess that's probably dependent on the topic. So welcome to everyone. I want to tell you a little bit about this event. The SUNY Best is basically a series of workshops that we do every couple months, sometimes every month, but every couple months. And we're just trying to, especially for manufacturing, they're not specifically for manufacturing, but most of the times we try to make them manufacturing oriented to serve our manufacturing community. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. SUNY Best comes under the umbrella of an organization called CEM. And I wanted to put this up here as a brand new logo. We finally have a logo. We never really had a logo for CEM.
Nice.
It's a brand new organization. So our folks here, our publication folks here at SUNY IT, developed this wonderful logo. So I like to use it whenever I can. But the Center for Global Advanced Manufacturing is a partnership between some folks down in manufacturing folks down in the Hudson Valley and folks here in the Mohawk Valley. And as the tagline says, the mission is to lead New York's manufacturing resurgence. And it's a 501c3 nonprofit that's been around for a couple of years. Only been around for a couple of years. And we're really starting to see some movement now and some things. So you'll see a lot of activities here in the Mohawk Valley that come under this umbrella of CEM. I also want to thank some folks who kind of help us with these events. First of all, Mohawk Valley Applied Technology Corporation. Many times we partner in a lot of things that we do together. Tomorrow there's a solutions forum that's going to be happening right here, and David and your organization certainly. Thank you for helping us out with things. Our Small Business Development Center here at on campus at SUNY IT, always a partner on these events. And I say we have a good contingent today. We have Roxanne, who's the acting director, Kate Elcott, Dave Lehrman, and an alum, Sam Russo. So we've got a really good contingent from the Small Business Development Center. And of course, SUNY IT provides the facilities, and this lecture series wouldn't happen without their support. And so the topic today is called training within industry, or also the acronym is TWI. And our presenter is Scott Curtis. I'll give you a little background on Scott. Done a lot of things in his career. He's been a process engineer, maintenance manager, plant superintendent, plant manager, operations manager, ton of operating manufacturing experience, a lot of experience in Lean Six Sigma. Okay. And he's had training in Six Sigma from the University of Tennessee. He's got a bachelor's, Rochester Institute of Technology, MBA from the University of Phoenix. And Scott and I used to work together in our former careers. So that's kind of how Scott got here today. I'm kind of leaning on, hey, I need somebody to help out. And this is a great topic. It's a fantastic topic. And so I turned to Scott. So, Scott, thanks, Mark. Leave it up to you. All right. Get your attention. I got to let one. Yeah.
Okay, so while Marv is bringing the presentation up, just want to get a sense for, or from the audience, on how many people know anything about TWI. Dave, of course. Got a couple of folks over here. Have you used it in the past?
We use elements of it
Good. So, is it fair to assume that the balance of the group, you know not much about TWI? Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk through a little bit of the history of TWI, give you a sense for where this came from. I'm going to get into the basics of the program itself. There's 3 J programs, and I'll explain more about that when I get into it. and then start to talk about the connection to lean manufacturing, how it's really a foundation piece for lean, and then talk a little bit about how to use it or how to implement, the real approach that we have seen that works well. So that's essentially what I'm going to cover today. So the other thing that many people don't realize is that, well, how many people are doing lean manufacturing or in some way, shape, or form doing continuous improvement or lean or thinking about getting into it? So a fair amount of the audience is using it or trying to use it. And so a lot of people today are looking at the Toyota production system, TPS, as the benchmark. That's been the benchmark or one of the examples of how to do lean manufacturing for a number of years. And many of you have seen the series of books that have come out about the Toyota Way, the Toyota series of books that try to dig into what TPS is all about. One of the things that many people don't realize is that if you go back to the early 50s, the very beginning of Toyota's transformation in getting into lean and TPS was the introduction of TWI back in the early 50s. So the core foundation pieces of Toyota's production system and that whole lean manufacturing renaissance was due to, by and large, a large part of it was TWI. So free with that. All right, so just a little bit about the organization that I work for. I work for the TWI Institute. We're a not-for-profit. We're based out of Liverpool. Really, the organization, our mission is to advance the work and the implementation of TWI in North America and worldwide. And to date, I think our number is up over 750 certified trainers that we've put through the system. And I'll explain more about that as we get into what that means by certified trainer. And this isn't just limited to manufacturing. This really, it's applicable in almost any industry, TWI, any job or area where people need to be trained and people need to follow a standard method of doing the work. Whether it be, there's a lot of application in healthcare, energy service, even in retail. We're starting to get into retail now. We've done a lot of work in the last year with Amazon. We did some work with a big furniture chain down in Florida, training their sales reps how to sell mattresses. So it's applicable across a wide range of industries. So that's a little bit about us. So let's talk about the history of TWI and where it came from. This program was developed and started during World War II. A lot of the work was done prior to World War II. But getting forced into World War II was the crisis that made this move forward. The U.S. government, they recognized that they needed a way to train the unskilled labor that was coming into the industrial base to support the war effort. So that was really the driving force behind the development of that. You can see what they said here with the gun to their heads. They had to come up with a solution to the problem that they had to get people trained quickly and effectively to do the jobs. And think about what was happening at the time. Skilled labor was being drafted and was going to war. What was coming into the factories, by and large, was unskilled. It was farmers and fishermen and housewives. So they had no manufacturing or industrial experience. So they were thrown into these jobs, and they really had to come up with a way to train them so that they could quickly get into the job and be effective. So they came up with this process of TWI. Now, Rosie, I think everybody here recognizes Rosie the Riveter from the past. Rosie, she was I don't know if you could call it a marketing campaign or it was an initiative in one of the companies, I think it was Westinghouse actually, where they had promotional things happening in the factory itself. And, Rosie kind of became the benchmark for TWI, that whole effort of we can do it. She's widely recognized even today. But Rosie River was one of the examples of bringing the unskilled labor into the factories and helping out the war effort. So, they had to come up with a mission of what they were trying to achieve in rolling this out into the industrial base that was supporting the war effort. And they recognized that, it says here, their mission, that the real job had to be done by industry, within industry. So they had to get this down to a level, and primarily it was the first line supervisors, that they had to develop skills to be able to manage these people that were coming into their workplace. So this was targeted originally at first line supervisors because they had the most contact with the employees on a daily basis. All right? It wasn't necessarily the training departments. It wasn't the superintendents. It was targeted towards first-line supervisors or team leaders to develop their skills, to be able to effectively train their people, manage their people, and get them to improve. So quickly going through this, fast forward to the end of the war, the TWI effort, they sampled a large number of companies. It was over 600 client companies that were monitored by the TWI service. And they found that by and large, all of them had tremendous improvements in these metrics that they tracked. And you can see that they increased productivity, they reduced training time, they reduced labor hours, scrap, and then even grievances in the union shops. So these were some of the impact of implementing the program. Now, these numbers are still, you still see these today at clients that we work with. And, one of them here, for those of you that are bringing on new employees, it says that 100% of them saw reduced training time by 25% or more. Today, the number that is our benchmark, if you've got a new employee coming in the door, and if it takes you, let's say, 4 weeks, from the time they walk in to the time that they are ready to go doing an entry-level job, we see this with the application of TWI reduced down to 1 week. It's a 75% reduction. And we're not afraid to say it. Absolutely, we see it all the time. It takes 4 weeks. With applying TWI, and particularly job instruction, you can reduce that down to 1 week. Okay. Just some more data on what they saw as a result of applying this in the output. You can look at the data here. It's quite impressive. Many feel that, some of the historians, that this was a big part of how the Allies won the war, was that we outproduced the enemies. They just couldn't keep up with the output of tanks and guns and everything else that went along with it, and airplanes. So it was very successful. So, what happened after the war? What happened after the war? Well, it was slowly, I guess over the course of 4 or 5 years, TWI in the manufacturing base in North America was abandoned. So why was it abandoned? Well, we had those returning from the war, the skilled labor, going back to their old jobs. And they had not been exposed to this process, this methodology, this new way of managing in the manufacturing environment. So there was a lot of, within TWI, there's some soft skill training for the supervisors on how to deal with people. And that was very much different than what's called the old school management. The superintendent, the manager saying this is how we're going to do it. So when that group that had been exposed to the old school way, when they came back, they weren't really comfortable with that, and so it was slowly phased out. Almost, by the end of the 40s, going into the 50s, there wasn't much left of it. So that's really what happened to the TWI effort here in North America. So what happened after that? Well, as I mentioned when I started, Toyota picked up this in the early 50s. Well, how did they pick it up? Well, many of you know that there was an effort to rebuild, Japan in particular, and many of the other countries that were devastated. Some people say that we were doing this to fight off communism, but we were there to help rebuild the industrial base, to get them up to speed. So, a lot of smart people went over there with good programs. One of those was TWI, that was introduced to Japan in the early 50s. And so, we went over there, and this will make more sense as we get through the presentation, but after the initial efforts, we left behind 35 certified institute conductors, or 35 certified trainers, that were able to then train others within their companies on how to do TWI. And of course, one of the companies that picked it up out of these 35 was Toyota. And ran with it. So that was the beginning of TWI over in Japan and other parts of Europe and in Asia. It was introduced over there as it slowly died here in North America. So I'll try to make a connection here to the lineage back to the original programs that we had at the Institute. So in 1951, Mr. Ogawa was one of the original 35 certified conductors and trainers. And he trained, so that was in 1951. 1960, Mr. Ogawa trained Mr. Shibuya at SUNY. So that goes back to 1960. And Mr. Shibuya, he was head of the training for SUNY for quite a while. And in 1980, they hired a gentleman called, his name is Patrick Grubb. Pat is, he was going to school at Drexel. Grew up here in Pennsylvania area. However, his mother was from Japan. His father was in the service and met his mother, and so he had Japanese heritage. And so when he finished school, he wanted to go back to Japan to experience his mother's culture and live in Japan for a while. So when he went over to Japan, he was able to get a job at Sanyo, and he was introduced to TWI. And he was doing that for 21, 22 years at Sanyo, when he decided, through the efforts of some folks at the Institute and Bob Rona, to leave Sanyo and start the Institute. And the primary mission was to reintroduce TWI back into North America. So that was back in 2001 or 2002. And so, we're very, very fortunate. We've got this direct lineage back to the original programs and how it was being used in the 40s and the 50s, and then the progression up through in Japan, and the refinements and the improvements that were made to it. Okay. All right. Changing gears just a little bit. So let's fast forward to where we are today in, by and large, North America, with training needs. Now, if we take a look at, this was back in 2005, I got some data from 2005, 2011, it's all very consistent. And it's probably consistent with what many of you see in your environments and your businesses today. That you have a shortage of qualified workers. And it's particularly problematic on the front lines. You know, we're on the front lines, we see this a shortage of qualified, skilled production employees. And how many people today, if you really, if you step back and you look at your training programs, you may have wonderful documentation in place, you may have a structure in place, but at the end of the day, primarily your training is unstructured job shadowing, or the buddy system, right? Many places still, that ultimately, that's how that skill or knowledge gets transferred, is through that one-on-one buddy system. And if you think about it, there's a lot of variation involved there, because it's dependent on the person delivering the training. That they're going to show that new person their way, their special traits, their knack for doing the job, which may be okay, but it may not be the standard. It may not be the one best way. So keep that in mind as we go through this. All right. So they talked about, once again, still in 2005, what they said, you know, for training in a manufacturing environment, we've got to get employees, they got to learn how to learn. And the best way to do that is with action learning. You know, hands-on training, not sitting in a classroom. You know, there's a certain level of information you can pick up, knowledge transfer, by reading and being lectured to. However, you know, to really acquire the skills, it's got to be hands-on training, primarily. So that's what they determined in 2005. All right, so we fast forward again to 2011. Same information from NAM. You know, they identified when they were surveying businesses, you know, some of the problems that they had. You know, what were they facing? Well, a highly skilled and flexible workforce topped the list of their needs. And I'm not sure that it's problematic for everybody here, but I'm certain that, you know, it could be a problem for you. All right, or you wouldn't be here. Okay, a little bit of the history, where the program came from, and quickly relating it to some current day problems in manufacturing or in any industry. So now, excuse me, I'm going to get into some of the background on the program itself. So when this was developed, once again, I said it was targeted towards first-line supervisors. Now today, we use that term quite a bit more loosely. Obviously, it is intended to be targeted towards first-line supervisors, but it really, it's anybody that directs or influences the work of others. It can be peer-to-peer. It can be in a team leader situation. You have an hourly employee that is functioning as sort of the leader of a small group. They are, in certain cases, they are in a supervisory role. They're in a leadership role. And you have to develop those leaders. And so many companies today do a very, very poor job of developing those first-line leaders. First-line leadership is in my opinion, in my 25 plus years in manufacturing, it's the hardest job out there in a manufacturing environment. It's thankless the way it's structured. You know, you've got the problems from the floor, and you're taking heat from management about output, about quality, about everything. And so that person is really, it's a tough role. They're caught in the middle. So, but going back to, this goes back to the turn of the century, back to the 40s, but it's still relevant today. And they said that there's 5 basic needs of the supervisor. And knowledge. And 2 of those are, they have to have knowledge of the work, and knowledge of their responsibilities. You know, the policies, the procedures, the things that an organization has in general. You know, they've got to have some knowledge of their work. These things can be acquired via normal training methods. You know, by classroom instruction and by reading, things like that. That's still a good way to acquire knowledge. But that's not all that a supervisor needs to have. A good supervisor. They've got to have some skills. Okay? And they've got to have skills in these three areas. They've got to have skills in leading their people. They've got to have skill in instruction, and then skill in methods improvement or continuous improvement. So these are the three real skills that every supervisor, every leader, every team leader should have to lead a group. And that's what was, you know, they determined back then, and it's still very much applicable today. All right, so when you roll it all together, you know, this is the 5 needs of the supervisor. You've got skills and knowledge, but it all revolves around doing it safely. You know, that's one of the core tenets of TWI is, you know, with anything that we're doing, any training that we're developing, it's with an eye towards doing it safely. You know, safety and productivity and efficiency, quality, but it all revolves around that. Okay, so those are the 5 needs. Now, they saw that they needed to develop this in a way, this program, that was pretty standardized. And so that people, you know, that it was effective. All of the 3J programs in TWI, job instruction, job relations, and job methods, they all have a very standard 4-step learning method that they go through. Very standard. And I don't know if I have a slide here that shows the connection of PDCA. This stuff's all interconnected. But you know, you have to effectively prepare the trainee. You've got to do a good job of the presentation, and that presentation has to be consistent from trainer to trainer, or from trainee to trainee. That's how you establish standardized work. It's in that delivery of the training, not your unstructured job shadowing. All right? You apply it, and then you test it. So PDCA. All right, and then there's a standard delivery method as well. In each of these programs, they determined that it was best when they're delivering this training at a factory, at a business, that they kept the groups to no more than 10, and they wanted to do this over 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday. So what do? You get a cross-functional group. You've got supervisors. You want to have some supervisors, team leaders, actually hourly folks from the floor, maybe some people from the training group, a superintendent, somebody in that second level, go through this training. And they're acquiring skills throughout the week. They get the basics on Monday, on Tuesday they get a little more. On Wednesday they start to practice the skills that they're learning. And by Friday, they've got a pretty good handle on the basics of, let's say, job instruction, for instance. They can break down a job, and they can deliver using the 4-step method. But many people say, why do you have to do it Monday through Friday over 5 days? Because if you condense this into a day-and-a-half presentation, they're not practicing the skills that they're acquiring through the week. Because they learn something on Monday, they learn something on Tuesday, they start to practice it, they reflect, they think, they go back to their jobs, they're thinking about it. You wouldn't get that if you just did that on a Monday, did a day-and-a-half presentation. So that's why it's coming. All right, so, the tenet here is learn by doing. It's not about the classroom training, the classroom demonstrations, although that's part of it. The real learning happens out on the floor when we start applying it to their real jobs. Okay. This goes back to, way back. I hear, I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. All right, so let's look at some data, some metrics, some data. This is the different levels of, I guess, retention, different methods of training. Telling alone. You tell somebody something, they're going to remember it fairly well in a few hours. 3 days, maybe not so much. Showing alone, more effective, but the retention isn't quite as good as showing and telling. But really, show, tell, and have them do it. And the key thing here is, when they're doing it, they have to demonstrate to the trainer that they know how to do it. That they know the important steps. That they know the key points. And they know the reasons why they're doing it. That reason why is a big, big missing element in training today. You can go out and ask somebody, well, what are you doing? They can show you what they're doing. And they can probably tell you what the person who trained them told them about this. Well, I'm doing this, this, and this. If you ask them why they're doing it a particular way, in a particular sequence, 9 times out of 10, they won't be able to tell you. They won't be able to tell you why. And because they don't know why, that opens it up for interpretation that, you know what, well, I'm going to come up my own best way. And that's where you start to introduce variation into the process at that basic level. If you go out and watch, if you've got a particular job, you've got different people doing that job, if you go to Gemba and you watch them, I guarantee you're going to see variation. And that variation has an effect on quality, on cost, on efficiency. Right? So, that's the best way to do it. All right, let me get a little bit deeper into JI itself. So, you can read what it says here. You can teach people to quickly learn how to do a job effectively, safely, and conscientiously. Once again, it's got a 4-step approach. Prepare the worker, present the operation, try it out, then you follow up. Anybody that's been around this long enough, this is the mantra of JI. If the worker hasn't learned, the instructor hasn't taught. 2 key things in job instruction. Learning how to do a job instruction breakdown. How to break down a job. A task. And, people ask, well, I've got this very complex job that, there's different steps to it, a sequence, and it takes, 20 minutes to do it. Okay. You may have 4 or 5 breakdowns within that particular job. You got to break it down into trainable elements. I see so many times today where companies they think they're doing job instruction. All they're doing is a reformatting exercise. They take their existing SOPs and just reformat it into the job instruction breakdown sheet, and all I've done is just make it look better, or change the look of it. It does them no good. When they have 16, 18, 24 important steps, there's no way you can train that effectively in one time. You've got to break it down. So what is it? It's you break a job down and you list very concisely what the important steps are as the job advances. You identify what the key points are, and you can see quickly, make or break the job. Does it injure the worker, or does it make the work easier? Does it make the work easier? And here, I talked about a second ago, you identify the reasons why you're doing this. So if the person knows why they're doing this, they're more apt to follow it every single time. They're less inclined to come up with their own way. And if they have an idea on how to come up with a better way, there's a process to do that, a structured approach, which is job methods, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that, this is, half of JI is the ability to effectively break down a job. This, the job instruction breakdown sheet, and this is a poor one, it's a bad example. It's not a supplement for, or it doesn't replace work instructions, it doesn't replace SOPs. What it really is, by and large, the trainer's script, the trainer's delivery notes on that particular job. If the trainer's doing his job well, he is going to follow that JI breakdown exactly. There's no added words, there's no ad lib. He states the important steps. He demonstrates it. He goes through it again, talks about the important steps and then the key points. He goes through it a third time, demonstrates important steps, key points, and the reasons. Then you turn it over to the trainee. And here's where it gets sticky for a lot of people. You have the trainee demonstrate to the trainer that they can do the job. Repetition 1. Repetition 2, they have to go through, do the job, and tell the trainee what the important steps are in the right sequence. The third time through, they're demonstrating the job, they're going over the important steps, but they're talking about the key points as well. This is where it gets hairy. Fourth time through, they've got to demonstrate important steps, key points, and then the reasons for those. So think about that repetition and how difficult that might be. But it's that repetition that, best way to describe it, it tattoos it on your brain. And when you're done with the training, sometimes it takes 5, 6 repetitions to get through it. But it goes back to, this, right there. They have to demonstrate to the trainer that they know it. So what is this? This is at Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle, Washington. They are leaders in applying lean in healthcare. They're very, in healthcare circles, they're very well known for their lean applications in healthcare. They've done TWI. This was their first pass at a breakdown. This was hand washing. In hygiene in the hospital is very critical to ward off the spread of infection. This was their first pass. Now, it looks good. There's too much here. There's too many words, too much stuff going on. You'll never be able to train for this. After refining their skills, this is what they ended up with. Good, solid breakdown. You can see 6 steps, very succinct key points, and the reasons tied to those key points. Now, you may look at this and say, this is really effective. It's effective if they're following the 4-step method of training. Okay, another tool that's used, this is the training timetable. You've got to have a structured approach to training. It just can't be left to the whim of the supervisor or the production area. It's got to be structured, because what happens in many cases, you see it all the time, if it's not structured, training usually falls to the bottom of the priority list. There's always another crisis. There's always another something happening that says training is going to fall to when we get around to it, when we're not busy, when we don't have the crisis. Well, guess what? Very few organizations have that luxury of just, having that free time to train. My point is, you've got to make time. You've got to assess the skills of the employees to know where they are. If any of you have been exposed to the toilet production system, and you know that they've got the skills matrix with the circles and the quadrants that you kind of gauge where the employees are, It came from this, folks. This is where it came from, in the early 50s. All right, I'm moving pretty fast. JR. You can read that. It builds supervisor and team leaders how to evaluate, take proper action, solve, and prevent problems, people problems, by and large. Once again, it's got the the fourth step. You define your objective when you're faced with a people problem. Define the objective. You get the facts, you weigh and decide, you take action, and you check the results. You see that? Now, in step one, how many people in manufacturing have supervisors or people in the organization that, when they're dealing with people, I don't want to hear the personal problems. You got to leave that stuff at home. We're here to do a job. We're here to get production out the door. We can't allow that, external stuff to affect us. So we can't have that here. But guess what? It's real, and it affects workers. We all have problems at certain times in our life, and we all know that it spills over into the workplace. Now, when you're dealing with a problem, those opinions and those feelings are fact to that person. So you have to weigh that as part of the analysis. We all have rules within our organizations, within HR, about things that you can do, discuss, how much information you can extract from somebody and share with others. That this is all within those boundaries. But it's treating people with respect and recognizing that, yeah, that has an effect on what happens in the workplace and dealing with it. Now, the other part of JR is preventing problems. That's dealing with the problem, but how do you prevent problems? Very basic things that it's often overlooked by supervisors or team leaders. You want to let each worker know how they're doing. Everybody wants to know how they're being viewed by their immediate boss. Am I doing okay? Am I doing my job? Everybody wants to know that. You give them credit when it's due. You don't lay credit out like it's candy. You give it when it's due. When somebody does something that is, maybe a little bit exceptional, above and beyond, they really did something well, you let them know. You give them praise. And the other thing is, you've got to let people know in advance about changes. How many of us have gone into work on Monday morning and been hit with a new initiative that we weren't aware of? It throws you into a tailspin. And, you're thinking about it, your gears are turning, and oh my gosh. You got to let people know in advance so they can take it in, internalize it, and ask questions. So they can figure out and maybe give you feedback. And then here, you got to make the best use of each person's ability. You're going to have different levels in a group. It's up to the supervisor to figure out, they've got to know the skill level of the people, they got to make the best use of those skills, and they have to develop their people that need skill development. That's the role of a supervisor. So job methods. This is the third leg of the J programs. This is where, how many have done Kaizen events in your organizations? Kaizen events. Taiichi Ohno at Toyota is the originator of Kaizen. Where did he get the idea for Kaizen? Job methods. This is the root of Kaizen. So, what is it? You've got supervisors, team leaders, they're analyzing their jobs, making the best use of the people, machine, material now available. This isn't an exercise to figure out, I need $1.5 million for a new piece of equipment. It's, to improve what you have today. Because there's a lot of improvement there to be had. Once again, Four-step method, you break the job down, and then this is different than the job instruction breakdown. This is more of an industrial engineering exercise. So this gets confusing to folks if you implement JM too soon after JI. We recommend that JM be introduced no sooner than 6 months after JI. In many cases, we say wait 12 to 18 months because there's so much improvement that you can gain from JI and JR alone. You've got to create that stability first. You've got to take out that other variation out first before you truly can start to improve the methods. So here's the sheet that goes along with it. It's a industrial engineering exercise. You know, right down to the bug's eye detail. You're breaking the job down. Every step, sequencing, why, where, when, who, and how. And then you start to question this stuff. You come up with ideas on how to eliminate these or improve them. All right? The why and the what, you can't answer why we're doing it or what good is it doing us in this process. You get rid of it. Where, when, and who. You combine and rearrange. Classic Kaizen. And then the how. The how. You simplify. Take steps out. So that's JM. A really broad, quick overview of JM. And the other part of JM is that once you get JI implemented, and people understand what the standard is, what standardized work is, it allows them to then creatively think about, because they're doing their job every day, they're starting to think about improvements to their job. This is the structured approach to improvement. You just can't have people running off trying these new ideas because you're introducing variation again potentially. So you've got a structured approach that they come up with ideas, they exercise the idea, they try to document to see if it truly is a better way. That's when they engage the process engineers or the technicians or the Lean Six Sigma black belts to help them with figuring out if it truly is a better way and coming up with some of the calculations. And many of them are absolutely floored. Let's say when they save 10 or 15 seconds on an operation, when they start to do the math, over the period of time, maybe for a year's period of time, it can be tens of thousands of dollars in savings. They're absolutely amazed at that. And they feel so empowered by that. This is the beginning of continuous improvement. When they're thinking about these improvements all the time, and it's these little improvements that get the big gains. I'll get into that more in a few minutes. All right, so quickly, you apply the new method. You sell the change to others via JR. You put the new method to use right away via JI. You lock it in. You create the new standard. You create the new breakdown sheets. You implement it. You train it. People know what the new way is. You lock it in. You give credit where it's due. I won't go over this a lot. It's the interaction between the programs and the benefits, because these things do work hand in hand. They go together. JI and JR, standard work is adhered to when people want to follow the instruction. When they have a relationship with their trainer or their supervisor. JI and JM, the improvements will stick when they're taught properly, of course. And then, these JR and JM, your results, when people don't really take off, when people are involved, and they feel like they're part of the process, part of the improvement, they're bringing value to the workplace every day. They're actually excited about home work. Okay, job safety, it's the 4th J program that was actually developed in Japan. It wasn't one of the original programs. Once again, it goes over a 4-step approach. This one is, once again, targeted towards supervisors. And the key, what they're trying to do here is get the supervisors to be aware of the environment and to spot causes of danger or spot potential accidents and eliminate those causes before it turns into something. That's, by and large, what we're trying to do with job safety. Problem solving, and I'm really blowing through this stuff quickly. Problem solving is, it's the combination of all, actually 3 or 4 J programs into one process. And it's very powerful when you compare the Toyota problem solving against the TWI problem solving, virtually almost identical because they both have their roots in TWI. And you isolate the problem, you prepare a solution, you correct the problem, and you follow up. Many problems have more than one element to it. And that's, the recognition through problem solving is that, there may be a methods problem, there may be maybe a people problem, a materials problem, but it allows you to go in and identify what the root causes are and deal with them. It's a quick overview. Most companies they're not ready to do, well, you can't do problem solving with the TWI tools until you've been through all 3 J programs. Most organizations don't get through all 3 J programs for at least 2 years. It takes, from day 0, it's a 2-year journey. If you're doing it at the appropriate pace, JI and JR, you work that for a period of time, create the stability, and then you're ready for job methods. It's about a 2-year journey. Some do it takes longer, but on average. All right, so how am I doing on time, Mark?
You're doing great.
What time is it?
It's only about just after 9.
After 9, okay, so I'm on pace. I think I'm a little over halfway through the slide deck here. Okay. Now, so I've gone through the history, I've gone through an overview of the J programs themselves. So now, let's talk about the application within Lean, the connection to Lean. And when we talk about here is tactical Lean. Most companies, and the ones that I've worked for in the past, they approached Lean as a set of tools. Okay, which tool are we going to use to drive improvement? 5S, single piece flow, is it Kaizen, which tool are we going to use? That's okay, but it's not. It's wrong. In our opinion, my opinion, it's not the right approach. And I didn't realize this until I got, started, being exposed to Lean and being held accountable for results via the Lean improvement processes. And we started to realize that there was, something wrong here. We're implementing the tools, but people don't understand why we're doing it. Here comes another program. So that's the problem with many Lean implementations. And you can see some of the issues here. People resist change because they don't know what it's about. People think it's somebody else's job to get improvements. It's the engineer or it's the Six Sigma guy. It's not my job to do. I'm just here to do my job. I'm not here to improve, right? Or they rely on the scheduled events. Or people want to improve, but they don't really know how to get their ideas forward. Maybe they brought an idea forward, and yeah, we'll get to that, at some point in time. So guess what? They're not going to bring any ideas forward again. So that's the problem with tactical Lean. And then, of course, the last one is, we all see this. We're all caught up in the urgency of getting the numbers out, that we end up leaving improvements after we get the numbers, whereas it should be the other way around. It should be part of the process. Now, this is from the Toyota Way Field book, and it looks at the house of Lean, the house of tools. And I'm sure you're all familiar with most of these. But the problem is that you've got to build a foundation for the house, and that foundation, in our opinion, is TWI. job instruction, job relations, and job methods, to achieve standardized work. You know, I feel that standardized work ought to be down here as one of the foundation pieces. Because if you don't have a stable process, you know, you're lucky if you get improvements. All right, so here's a graphical illustration of what most companies go through with their Kaizen events. They schedule an event, it goes well, they see improvement. You've probably all done that. You've seen that initial bump, that initial improvement as a result of your event. So what happens after that? Well, the team that was there, they pick up and they move on to the next area. And the people that were exposed to the Kaizen, they're left to their own devices. You may have changed the documentation, created new work instruction, but you haven't trained them effectively. And so what happens over time? Erosion, entropy, slides back. Happens almost every single time if you don't lock it in with job instruction. So you come back a few months later, what happened? No, our numbers were up here, now they're back down here. It's because of that. Okay? So you do another event, you get the sawtooth improvement, you're getting improvement, but it's not as consistent and as effective as it could be. All right, just a couple of quotes from some of the experts from the field book, TWI field book. The first step is basic level of stability. Now, I've said this over and over this morning. You've got to stabilize things. Art Smalley, he came out of, David Meyer, he came out of Toyota. Art Smalley came out of Toyota. They all say that you really got to stabilize things first before you can start to improve. So how does this apply to TWI? Same graph, you've got your event, you see your improvement. Now, however, if you stabilize the process with JI and you build an environment, a culture with JR and JS, you start to get little daily, hopefully, improvements. That gets that curve going up instead of flat. That's what continuous improvement in Lean is all about. It's the culture. It's not about the tools. It's about creating a culture in your organization where people feel empowered and they are excited about coming to work and they're excited about improving their process. And because they know what the standards are, they know what the expectations are, and they have a structured approach for approaching the improvement, you can get this. I won't cover this very much. There's a big difference between what standardized work is today in a lean environment versus work standards. I've been guilty of this as well. If you're in a cost accounting type environment, you've got a per unit cost, and most organizations are happy if they're just producing at that unit cost, which is it's craziness. But really, in standardized work, you want to, what it says here, the best possible way, the least amount of waste, at the lowest cost. That's the difference. So. Standardized work, this is a snag from the field book. This is a standardized work chart from Toyota. And it outlines, I can't remember which one this is, doesn't matter. This job has about 8 different steps or sequences in it. What's important to know that each of these steps may have 1, 2, maybe 3 job instruction breakdowns associated with it, on how to train the employees on how to do that particular step. So that's the connection here with the job instruction breakdown sheet, and you roll this all the way up to a standardized work chart at Toyota. That's the connection. So people are going to know what these steps are, the sequence, And if they've been trained properly, they're all going to follow it. You know, those of you that have been around continuous improvement, Six Sigma, go back to the old Ishikawa diagram, the fishbone diagram, the classic 4 M's, man, machine, method, or materials. The TWI started to address the variation due to man, due to method, and job methods gets after the machine. So if you start to lock in and stabilize your processes, then you're more apt to find the root cause of your problems. If you can eliminate some of those root causes right off the bat. All right, just another way to look at this whole thing, the sustainability. You got to improve with these, build some stability. You stabilize it. It's a continuous loop. You know, so this isn't stagnant. This isn't the point here. Isn't that you hear many companies say, "Well, I'm all done with job instruction. You know, I've gone through and I've documented all my jobs." What are you talking about? It never ends. That's continuous improvement. There's always, if you're doing it well and doing it right, there's going to be new ways to do a job. And that's, of course, going to lead to revisions in the breakdown sheets, retraining. So it's an ongoing process. It's not finite. All right, I won't spend a lot of time here. It's kind of rehashing what I've already talked about. You know, TWI is a countermeasure to the problems with tactical lean, is really what we're seeing here. You know, lean, if you think about, I talked about, you know, old school management. You know, continuous improvement in lean has changed the role of the supervisor. It's much different today, or it should be much different in an organization. So it's changed that. And so if we look back to, you know, some of the classical definitions of the supervisor, we don't want our supervisors doing this anymore. You know, we don't want them to be you know, doing some of these activities. We don't want them to be you know, telling the people what to do. Nor many supervisors today in an organization, they feel that at the end of the day, they've had a good day depending on how many fires they've put out, how many crises that they've dealt with. That's not the role of the supervisor. I mean, it is to a certain degree, but their role is to develop their people and create improvement to a point where their folks are doing this. They're dealing with the problems as they come up. Because they know what the standard is. When something deviates from the standard, they've got some tools to deal with it. Not that everything's in complete chaos. They've got to call in the expert, the supervisor, to deal with it. So you don't want them to be the firefighter, nor do you want them to be the classical boss. You know, you show the picture up here of them, you know, up on the mezzanine, you know, watching the folks. You know, that's not going together. All right. Once again, some of the rehash. The role has changed in the lean workplace for the supervisor. You know, these things are all terribly important for the new manager, for the new supervisor. They've got to be able to communicate with the people. You're not pushing responsibility off on somebody else. They've got to deal with that. They've got to develop their people. And then they've got to get their people to take responsibility as well. All right, daily management. You know, really, this is drilling into, you know, the Toyota methodology and lean, that daily management, what has to happen before, what the focus should be from the supervisor. You know, it's to achieve and maintain that stability and standardization. And with that, quickly identify abnormalities, deviation, variation, and then start to attack it. So if you remember back to some of the original slides, I talked about the 5 needs. The 5 needs of the supervisor. All right. This comes straight from the Toyota Way Field Book. Now, how many people here have seen that? The Toyota Way Field Book? A few of you, okay. Now, it's sort of been the Bible for lean practitioners for a few years. And the two authors, Meyer and Leiker, they identified what's called in Toyota a group leader, which is basically a supervisor. You know, they went back to the original material. They said these are the characteristics needed to be a supervisor. Well, there's 6 things here, but you know 2 through 6, you've seen them earlier. Knowledge, knowledge of the job and the responsibility, and then skills in improving, leading, and teaching. The one thing that they added was willingness and desire to lead. That's important. So this, you know, right out of Toyota, modern day, goes directly back to the original program, the original material. Okay, then the team leader, that's the next level down. You know, their role, they may be, most likely they're going to be an hourly employee that's peer-to-peer, but they've got some leadership responsibilities. You know, they're there to identify, you know, deviation from the standards, and then help develop standard work. So it's, you know, it's a little bit different role for the team leader. Okay, so changing gears again. History, detail on the J programs themselves, the connection to lean. So now how do you roll this out? How do you implement it? This is how we recommend. We talk about a 7-step implementation process. So you want to have some people, cross-functional group within the organization. Number one, that they know, get some background in what TWI is. So you form a working group and get some background knowledge on the program and start to internalize it and figure out, you know, how is this going to help us? Where can we apply it? And so we start talking about select a pilot project. And here's my opinion. You want to select something in your plant, in your business, that's causing you difficulty. Don't pick something that, you know, it's easy to apply to learn the process. Attack a problem. Because if you do it right, you're going to see immediate improvements. So if you have, let's say, a work center or a machine or a process that you've got, your quality is poor, your defects are high scrap rate, efficiency isn't where it needs to be, and you can step back and say, okay, if we can establish standardized work there and reduce some variation and get people to follow, you know, identify the one best way and start to reduce some of that variation and deviation from the operator, we're going to see improvement. That's where you start. And don't bite off more than you can chew. You know, one area, one cell, one machine that over the course of, let's say, 2 months, you're going to attack this area. Once you get the 10-hour training, you may develop a dozen, 2 dozen breakdowns, and then you're going to train the balance of the employees that work in this area around this machine. And once you do that, once you create the breakdowns, you create the new one best way, and then you train them on this new method, your variation will reduce almost overnight. You start to see improvement. I've seen it in my past experience. We attacked we had a changeover crew. Their primary role was to change machines over. When we finished one product, we moved to the next. It was a pretty intensive exercise. One it took 2 to 3 hours to do. And upon startup, occasionally, more times than not, it took longer than standard to start the machine up because we run into, couldn't get the product into spec. Why? Was it machine settings? Was it, so we attacked the machine setup. And by establishing what the one best way was to set the machines up and train everybody on that. We took the defects down, took the standard time for changing the machine over from Mark, what was it? It was 8 hours at one point in
Oh,
time.
yeah, easily.
8 hours to change the machine over. The standard today is 2.5. Just, tremendous improvements. And, the first piece inspection is much higher. My point is, attack an area that's causing you difficulty. So you select the visible pilot project, you initiate the training. We go back to that 10-hour training, the JI. We usually do JI and JR together. Those, we always recommend doing those together. So your JI primarily is going to start to attack, the problems in this pilot area. So you get a cross-functional team, as I mentioned, team leaders, supervisors, hourly employees, maybe some folks from training, continuous improvement. Get them in a room, put them through the training, and then restructure your pilot project. And this is the other thing, you can't just let this thing, they get all excited about the training. On Friday afternoon, they slap each other on the back and they celebrate, and then they go back to their normal routine. You've got to have some oversight and some structure internally to run this as a project. You've got to hold them accountable to achieve something. So, that you go back to the training timetable. You want to identify X number of jobs and prioritize those somehow and hold them accountable to creating the job breakdowns. And some schedule the training. So over the course of a couple of months, you've gone through whatever number of jobs you identified, 16, 18, 24. You've trained X number of people, and you start to see the results. But you have to run this as a project with oversight. And that's what the working group should be doing. You should have a champion that's following this, and then you carry out your pilot project. You step back, you look at the results, then you figure out where do we go next. Many organizations decide to run another pilot project. They want to run another 10-hour class. That's appropriate. And/or, when you're doing this first initial training, you should identify somebody in that group that you want to have as your certified enduring trainer. Somebody that, after they take that 10-hour class and they gain the experience of doing the process, can go and take the certification training. There's a 40-hour, it's a pretty rigorous training that we put them through that allows that person then to deliver these 10-hour classes internally in your organizations. That's how you internalize this thing. That's how you sustain it. Instead of bringing in outside folks all the time, you have to bring the outside folks in to get it started, and to be your kind of your oversight, trusted advisor for a period of time. Because there's going to be questions and going to be follow-up that's needed. But once you get it rolling, we advocate that you internalize it. That's what Toyota did. They've internalized that to the point where I got many hundreds of certified internal trainers. Then you move on to the next area. Many describe this, you want to go deep before you go wide. It's easier in a small organization, actually, to go deep before you go wide. There's a number of reasons why, but right now we're dealing with a bunch of large organizations that all they want to do, they're pretty excited, they see it, and they want to spread it enterprise-wide. Well, guess what? All it's going to do is get a little bit of exposure, and then it's going to fizzle because they'll move on to the next initiative. So I'm fighting that with a couple of larger clients. So it's almost easier to do it with a small client. All right, so getting back to that certified trainer's role. Once they go through the pilot training, there's a bunch of stuff that happens. That was a real high-level overview of the 7-step implementation process. There has to be some auditing in place for two things. When you're developing these new trainers that go through the 10-hour class, once they start to deliver using the 4-step method, they're going to deviate. They're going to be, not quite sure. They're going to fall back into their old routines. The champion has to be, watching them, auditing them at some level to make sure that they're still following the four-step method, that they're still following that breakdown sheet, chapter and verse. Because once you start to deviate, all bets are off. You're right back to your unstructured job shadowing, just with new documentation. So it's critical. Good breakdowns and the four-step method. Those are the two things. And that's the role of the champion as well. Then you start to do this internally, and you start that multiplier effect. You get more people trained and exposed to it, and then they become the internal advisor. Okay, so let's look at some data, some results. This happens to be General Dynamics, defense contractor. This is their NASCO shipyard in San Diego. What they saw, and they looked at some, you can see the attributes that they looked at. Training with regards to safety, quality, efficiency, and then knowledge retention. They did a test. They said, let's see how the new method compares to our normal method of training. This is what they found. A huge improvement by applying TWI. From a safety standpoint, the old method, they trained 120 different folks or jobs, and they followed up with 10 unsafe acts after the training. To some that's unacceptable. To most it's unacceptable. After applying TWI, 350 sessions, they only found 2 occurrences of unsafe acts. Quality, you can see the same relationship here. Almost half of those were, more than half, they were doing things that were contributing to poor quality, whereas very few. So, so on and so forth, you can see that. Then really the knowledge retention, big. Almost all of them could retain what they were trained. Most people don't know this company. They make credit cards, smart cards, your ATM cards. They're a huge worldwide company. If you lose your ATM card, chances are the replacement comes from Jamalta, embedded with the information on it from your bank and everything. So it's a high volume manufacturing environment. Number of changeovers, small runs. Here again, I talk about this new operator training, 4 weeks to 1 week. Rework, huge reduction in rework. And then, a big thing here is tapping into latent capacity. Instead of the need to add more equipment, they improved their processes, reduced downtime, reduced machine changeovers, and they tapped into some capacity that they thought they had. Avoid capital expenditure. All right, I think I had 2 other slides. Marv and I worked down at Albany International, and I'll just verbalize the improvement there. And I came in 2005. It was 2006 or 2007. We started to do a new lean implementation. It was driven corporate on down. It was very standard, very tactical tools. We started getting into TWI, and we tried to do it on our own. And because when you look at the process on the surface, it looks very straightforward. It looks very simple. In some cases it is. But there's some things that really that have to be transferred and trained internally for the organization to be able to do it effectively. And the little nuances to the program. The importance of the good breakdown, the importance of the 4-step method. So we tried it on our own and we failed miserably. We didn't know that we were failing miserably. All that I knew was that when we started training with the new method, it didn't look any different than the old method. The only thing that looked different was the documentation. We got it, 25, 30 minutes into the training session on this new machine interface for one of the extrusion lines. The operator was sitting there going, and what do you, it's no different. Okay, well, time out. I reached out, got some help, and they came, the institute came in and said, okay, yeah, we got off track here, got us back on track. And by building that foundation with job instruction, job relations, and ultimate job methods, it allowed the rest of the lean and continuous improvement activities to take off. And so on a business that our sales were $30 million. So over the course of 3 years, same sales volume, same mix, by and large, no real changes there in volume. We took the operating income from about $250,000 to over $5 million on the same $30 million in sales. Was it all TWI? No, it was a bunch of initiatives, but we would not have been there, I'm convinced of it, would not have gotten to where we were if it weren't for creating that stability. And creating the culture, the true continuous improvement culture where the folks were engaged, they were excited, they loved the new training method. They loved the fact that, they've been doing this job for X number of years, and they're finding out things about it that they never knew before, that they were frustrated with. That's the beauty of the program. So that's how it helped us. So, what have you got here? This is a fairly typical journey. I talked about a 2 or 3 year process. Year 1, you got to create that stability. I've said it over and over again. You got to create the stability. That, phase 1 is that initial delivery with some follow-up. You start working a pilot project. You do it again. Then you start to build those internal trainers. And then you start to replicate internally. You go deep. Then you go wide. Year 2, you start to introduce job methods after you've created the stability. And then you start looking at problem solving when you roll all 3 together. But it's about a 3-year journey. The plant that Mark and I came from, they're one of the few in the country, no, one of the few in the world that have gone through actually all the J programs, all 4 with problem solving. And they're still doing wonderful things there, absolutely wonderful things with it. So, it can be done. There's not a lot out there yet doing it in North America. That's one of our missions is to reintroduce TWI to North America. It's been a forgotten gem. Asia's, that's one of the reasons why they ate our lunch through the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s in the auto industry, in the midst of it. And Europe, we still, 45% of our business is still overseas, Europe and Asia. And so our mission, really moving forward strategically is to continue to reintroduce it to North America. That's what we're trying to do. All right, just some literature that's come out of the Institute. The original workbook, Graup and Bob Rona authored that. They followed it up with the implementing TWI, basically case studies on what they've experienced. There's going to be a second edition coming out next year on this with some updated case studies. And then, of course, in healthcare, big area that we're working in, Patrick and one of the key head nurses from Virginia Mason Medical authored a book. Now, this book, we've been told by many, is the best description and example of getting to standard or standardized work, regardless of industry. So this happens to be in healthcare, but it's so clear once you go through it how you get there. Okay? And then the last slide, you do have a local provider here in the Mohawk Valley, and the ATC. We got a couple of gentlemen here from the ATC. We got Dave Palazzoli, who's a certified trainer, Paul McEnroe, who's the head of the organization. They're your local provider for TWI. Okay? can, if you have questions moving forward on any of the information that you presented today, how to get started, where to get started, these are the gentlemen that can help you. All right. I've got some flyers over on the table. I've got my business card over there. If you want to take some of that, feel free to. If you have other questions, you're free to. I'll leave Marv with the presentation. He can distribute that if people are wanting to get a copy of it electronically. So, questions?
Well, let me just take one point, because I find that if I don't say these things, people go out of the room and I don't get to say these things. And then we'll take questions for Scott. First of all, you find a flyer on your, Scott, could you talk a little bit, we talked a lot about, folks have been a lot about manufacturing. Could you talk a little bit about transactional organizations, transactional processes, how it's the same or different from manufacturing?
Yeah, it absolutely is applicable in transactional, whether it be banking, other service. One really outstanding example that we've worked on in the last year is at Amazon and their distribution centers. That's transaction. They're moving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pieces a day through their distribution centers. And with that type of a routine, you can drill it down to half a dozen real key jobs. And within those jobs, there's just a few key functions. But they're faced with training thousands of people to get to standard work. And they were struggling with that, so they reached out to us, and we've helped them with that. This is also applicable in, we're doing a lot of work in Denmark at a bank in Denmark. They're just they're going crazy with it. They're actually going to have there'll be a case study presentation next year at a conference that we're hosting in Copenhagen. Big presentation on banking. So it absolutely is applicable to, think about it this way. If you have a person that's doing a particular job, or a group of people that are doing a particular job, and you want them all to do it the one best way, and reduce that variation, then TWI is applicable. Absolutely applicable. And if you look at, in the service industry or transactional, if you really start to drill in, you'll see variation in the time it takes people to do particular jobs. And that's because they're all doing it their own special way. Now, the one thing I didn't talk about in detail, how do you identify the one best way? Well, you get that group of people, you observe and work with them doing that particular job. You don't do it with just one, you do it with a number of people doing that job. And you actually have to be there when they're doing it, and you're engaging them. When they do a particular step, okay, what did you just do? Did you advance the work? You start to document it. So you build a draft breakdown sheet. Then you work with the next person, and then the next person. And you start to automatically see the variation. Once you get enough data, you bring the group back together, and you have a best practice exercise. Say, okay, folks, this is what we see. Joe had a great idea on how to put this one particular part in, but Bill had a little bit different way. Let's talk about that. What is, why do you do it that way? What are the advantages, disadvantages? So this, you get good at it, it can be quick, but it takes some work to really identify the one best way and get buy-in through JR. You have adult conversations with you folks. You get them to agree that, yeah, let's try this one best way. They all, okay, let's try it. Typically, you'll go and try it. You make revisions to it 1 or 2 times. You get everybody to agree, yep, let's lock it in. Let's try it. It works. Then you train others.
How long does a typical pilot project take?
We say that it can be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to 6 months, depending on the scale and the size of the pilot area and how much internally you're pushing that forward. So the people that are going through the pilot training, over the course of their normal weekly routine, they got to spend some time doing it. A few hours, once or twice a week, working on the breakdowns, creating the timetable, starting to train others, So it takes time, but you have to stay after it. That's why it has to be run with oversight. Because if you don't, all that will happen is people get excited, and they fall right back into the normal routine. And it gets pushed to the back. And if you don't practice these skills that you learn right away, you lose them. You lose them.
Question. When you're structuring your first class and you go to a client and you're talking about structuring your first class, is there an advantage to bottom-up structuring lines and line people up more than an advantage from the top down? I mean, who do you want in that first class?
There's a couple of approaches depending on the organization and then the size of the organization. I like to get a good cross-section of both, hourly employees, team lead, supervisor, somebody that oversees the area, maybe a superintendent or somebody in charge of manufacturing. But there has to be some pre-work that goes on to get education within the organization from the top all the way down through to the bottom. So they, number one, they understand, and then they buy into the program that they're going to be implementing. And so there's some work that has to happen up front to get, to get some knowledge there, to get some buy-in. Sometimes in a large organization, we've gone in and done the classes just for middle or higher level managers to expose them to it so they know what to expect of their folks.
I was going to say, one of the best classes we had, the owner of the company sat right there. And everybody else who was too busy to be there sat there with the owner of the company. And it was just really powerful. And as he was nodding his head, everybody else's head nodded.
So yeah, everybody knew that how important it was because he was there, he bought in, now he was going to hold the expectation that we're going to use this.
He did the demonstrations, did every, full participant.
For instance, last week we were down in Connecticut at Electric Boat where they build the nuclear subs. We had a class just for superintendents in a particular area. And they're all like, yeah, this is what we need our first line supervisors to go through. So it depends, but it's good to have a wide range, a cross-section in that first class. Other questions?
We work here in the Mohawk Valley, and we have 17 different spoken languages at our facility. Multicultural differences.
Yep.
Have you seen where this program really is able to tie in and break down those barriers?
Yes, it can. That presents a challenge because when you're actually training the trainee, the trainer, if that person only speaks, say they only speak Spanish, or we had at the plant down in Portland, we had a large group from
Ukraine?
Ukraine. Thanks, Mark. Ukraine. Now they spoke some English. It was pretty limited. So that creates some challenges. So yeah, when you're demonstrating to the employee, showing, doing, and telling, so you're showing them how to do the job. You're telling them. So you may have to tell them in their native language. You may have to have people that you put through the training that can communicate with the others. And this absolutely, you're going to develop, this isn't just for a big misconception. Your supervisors aren't going to be doing all the training. That's not what this is intended to do. They need to be the ones that are developing their people. A lot of the training happens peer-to-peer. The people that you put through the 10-hour classes, those hourly folks, once they know how to break down jobs, once they know how to use the 4-step method, then that's the method that they use to train others. All right, so it's structured job training instead of unstructured job shadowing. It's a big difference, huge difference. Okay, so you're going to have people in your organization at the team leader or peer-to-peer relationship that are doing training. That's the way it needs to happen. There's no way in any organization that one person can effectively do all the training, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's a trainer in your training group. Their role is oversight. Their role is to know and establish some structure, and hold people accountable to get it done. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just get a lot of the, you know, yes, I understand, yes, you know, the
Yeah.
nodding of the head.
The difference with TWI, the JI, they have to demonstrate to the trainer that they can do the job in the right sequence, that they can tell them the important steps, the key points, and the reasons. They have to communicate to the trainer. It's not nodding the head, it's actually communicating to them that they know those important steps, those key points, and the reasons for those. That is the big difference. Okay?
Thank you.
Other questions?
About the order of classes. I mean, you mentioned JI, at the beginning you said, or no, during your talk, you mentioned you like JI, JR. You're recommending one before the other, but in a close time frame.
Normally when we go out, we always try to sell JI and JR together in the same week. So our typical structure is we'll do the job instruction in the morning, whatever the first, that, whether it's 7 a.m., 8 a.m., whatever shift change you like to use. And then in the afternoon, really we like to get the same 10 people through JR. So sometimes it's a scheduling issue to break people free. The best scenario is to let people, relieve them from their job for the week. If you can get backfill for those. And I know in small companies it's almost impossible, so we work with that all the time. But the ideal situation is you get 10 people, they're free for the week, they go through the JI in the morning, they work with the trainer through the day to improve their skills. They take the JR in the afternoon to improve their people skills. So they're building on that all through the week. If you can release a person for 40 hours during the week, they're going to really accelerate. But it's very typical that we get them for 2 hours in the morning and then 2 hours in the afternoon. So we do it both ways. But we like to structure JI and JR together in the same week. We do a single JI. We do JI in the morning with 10, and we do JI in the afternoon with a different 10. It's very flexible, very flexible. It all depends on your needs and your schedule. Other questions?
Okay, well, Scott, we'd like to thank you for coming this morning.
Yeah.